Lucy Letby is accused of the murder of
7 babies and the attempted murder of 10 others.
While she was working on the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital.
Letby denies all of the charges over the incidents.
Lucy Letby was the only person working on the night shift. It was alleged in court that their mother was apparently told by Miss Letby, "Trust me, I'm a nurse."
This is a podcast about one of the most anticipated criminal trials for years. It involves the most shocking of allegations: the alleged murders and attempted murders of tiny, premature babies at the hands of a neonatal nurse whose very job it was to look after them.
Lucy Letby is on trial at Manchester Crown Court, accused of killing 7 infants and injuring 10 more at the Countess of Chester Hospital in Cheshire.
In total, there are 22 charges, all of which she denies.
I'm Liz Hull, Northern correspondent for the Mail. I will be in court to report on the case as it develops.
And I'm Caroline Cheetham, a broadcast journalist. Every week on this podcast, we'll examine what's happened and bring you the details behind the headlines.
This is the trial of Lucy Letby.
The case against Lucy Letby is that she murdered or tried to kill 17 babies while she was working as a neonatal nurse at the Countess of Chester Hospital in the northwest of England. She denies the charges.
The babies in this trial are not being named for legal reasons, and the identities of their families are also being protected. They're known only as babies A to Q.
7 of the babies died. 10 survived. Each one of these babies was or is someone's son or daughter, and the mums, dads and families of every baby are present in court, listening to every detail of how their child was allegedly killed or harmed.
We'll be bringing you that detail as the jury is hearing it from the prosecution and defence. We're getting behind the headlines to explain far more than the news reports you'll be reading, watching and listening to. And the importance of a fair trial is paramount, so we won't be getting into anything in this podcast that the jury have not been told, because they are the 12 people who have to decide the outcome of this case.
The jury is hearing about each baby in turn. They've been told 9 babies were allegedly killed or harmed by Lucy Letby between June and November 2015. Today, we're focusing on the 10th baby in this case, who the prosecution say Lucy Letby tried to smother.
Welcome to episode 15, Baby J.
A quick word before we start today. Liz and I are not actually together this week, so we're both recording from our home offices.
Yeah, but thanks to the wonders of Zoom, we can still bring you the detail from the court.
Baby J is a baby girl. She was born 8 weeks early, but Liz, by the time she was born in October 2015, her parents had already suffered the heartache of losing one baby because she was supposed to be a twin.
Yeah, that's right, Caroline. Baby J's mother was originally expecting twins, but she had a difficult early pregnancy, and at 17 weeks she went to London for specialist surgery. Jurors weren't told exactly what this operation was or what went wrong, but sadly one of the babies died. And although baby J was eventually born at the end of October 2015 without complications, the first few weeks of her life were tricky because she was born with a perforated bowel.
Now, her mother gave evidence in person to the court, and this exchange between her and Nick Johnson KC is read by actors.
After the treatment in London at 17 weeks, they had planned to give me a C-section at 34 weeks. Unfortunately, my membrane started to rupture around about 30 weeks. I was in and out of the Countess of Chester Hospital for 2 weeks prior to having my daughter, which was by emergency section at 32 weeks and 2 days.
Did the birth proceed satisfactorily?
Absolutely, yes. She appeared to be extremely well for her early term. They showed her quickly to us over the screen. She was breathing well, they weren't concerned, and then they whisked her away to the neonatal unit.
Were you taken down to the neonatal unit to see her?
I was, much later on. She was in room 1, which is the intensive care room at Chester. She was in an incubator. She appeared to be doing well. I was there for about 10 minutes when she produced a bit of brown bile from her mouth, and we called one of the nurses over. They then started to investigate what was happening.
Was the outcome of that your daughter was taken to Alderhay Hospital in Liverpool by ambulance?
That's correct. We were told that they had concerns about her bowel because they had started to do some x-rays and communicate with Alderhay. They had their suspicions. They identified something on the x-ray. A perforated bowel is what was identified. She had emergency surgery at Alderhay the day after she was born. They cut the bowel, removed about 1 centimetre of the bowel. They made the decision to give her 2 stomas. That's where the bowel protrudes from the body and allows the bowel to rest from surgery.
So Liz, baby J had the operation to repair her bowel and she recovered well. So much so that around 10 days later, on November the 10th, she was well enough to be transferred back to the Countess.
Yes, and once there, she continued her recovery. Although she started out in intensive care, jurors heard that over the next fortnight, she moved down through the nurseries on the neonatal unit as she got better and better. The only issue was that she was not gaining as much weight as the doctors would like, but nevertheless, by the end of November, she was being cared for in nursery 4, and that's where the least sick babies were. Her mother said that the doctors and she and her husband were preparing for her to go home.
But the prosecution say that all changed during the night shift of November the 26th into the 27th, when it's alleged Lucy Letby tried to smother baby J, causing her to suffer a seizure. So, Liz, let's go through what the court heard happened on that night shift. Now, a nurse called Nicola Dennison was baby J's designated nurse that night. Lucy Letby was looking after 2 other babies in nursery 3.
Yes, but despite this, the medical notes show that Lucy Letby was involved in baby J's care because she repeatedly co-signed for medication for her.
Now, the first time things started to go wrong for baby J was at around 4:40 a.m. That was just after she was given a feed. She became pale and mottled, and one of the more senior nurses, Mary Griffith, had to intervene to help with her breathing when her oxygen levels dropped.
Yes, Caroline, she recovered, but the jury was told that she suffered another drop in her oxygen levels 20 minutes later. This time a decision was taken to move baby J into nursery 2, and Nurse Griffiths took over her care so she could be monitored more closely.
But at just before 7 a.m, the alarm monitoring baby J's breathing sounded. By this time, consultant paediatrician Dr. John Gibbs, who we've heard from several times already during the trial, was on the unit.
Dr. Gibbs noted that her oxygen levels plummeted so low that they were unrecordable. Her circulation was also poor. Significantly, the court heard he believed baby J was suffering a seizure because her eyes were darting to the left, her arms were stiff and her fists clenched.
Soon after this incident, the medical notes show Lucy Letby co-signed for 2 lots of medication for baby J.
Yes, and at 24 minutes past 7, she collapsed and needed resuscitating again. Dr. Gibbs noticed her fists were clenched again and her eyes rolling to the left. He's due to give evidence next week, and the jury have previously heard that he will say he could find no medical cause for what happened.
And Liz, we should probably point out that the prosecution is only halfway through explaining what they say happened to baby J. Jury haven't yet heard evidence from the doctors and nurses on duty or the prosecution experts, so we will outline all of that in the next episode.
But Mr. Johnson previously told them, when he opened the prosecution's case several weeks ago, that the experts will say that the seizure suggests baby J's brain was starved of oxygen, most likely by smothering.
So in the run-up to this night shift, Liz, baby J's parents had been staying on the unit in what the jury was told was a sort of dry run, if you like, for having her at home to ensure that they could cope with her needs, which were quite complex, really, because of her bowel surgery.
Yes, but on the night shift of the 26th into the 27th of November, they'd actually decided to stay at home. Baby J's mother was questioned by Mr. Johnson and told the court what happened.
By that stage of your daughter's stay at Chester, you were staying overnight?
The plan was for me to stay overnight for a couple of nights because she was in room 4. We were really excited about getting her home. Other than the weight gain issue, she was doing really well. They had taken her off the monitoring system. She was free from them. I was doing the daytime cares and I was staying at night time to see if I could manage that at night as well.
Did there come a time on November the 26th when you went home prior to your daughter's collapse?
Yes, but I was there every day from 8 a.m.
What was the first you heard of an issue with your daughter?
I received a telephone call from a withheld number informing me to get to the hospital very quickly because she had collapsed.
Do you remember when that call was received?
Maybe about 7:10.
You were told that she had collapsed and to get here as quickly as you can.
Absolutely, yes.
And is that what you did?
Yes.
What did you see when you got to the hospital?
My daughter was in a half incubator, a hot cot in room 2, which was the high dependency room, and she was connected back up to a monitor and she looked floppy. She was very pale, yellowy in colour and not very responsive.
What impression did you get?
We were totally and utterly shocked because prior to this she was extremely well. She was coming home. We were preparing for her to come home and to look after her in the evening. Other than her weight gain, she was fine.
Did you speak to Dr. Gibbs?
No, my husband spoke to Dr. Gibbs and had some lengthy conversations with him. I was next to my daughter. I was very distressed by what I was seeing and experiencing.
Do you have a clear memory of how your daughter developed on November 27th?
We stayed overnight at the hospital and she recovered quite quickly. It was established there wasn't an infection. That wasn't the cause. The cause was unknown at that stage.
And like we've seen in previous cases, Lucy Letby finished her shift and began texting her colleague Jennifer Jones-Key. The messages are read by actors and start with Lucy Letby.
Wow, it turned manic. Left at 9:15, but others still there. Kiss.
Warned you, LOL. Don't know what it is. It seems to go pear-shaped. Hope you're okay.
Baby J went off, then had 33-week twins born at home. One vented on handover, plus a mountain of antibiotics.
Not like Baby J, but you can't allow for ones that just come.
Baby J fitting. May end up tubed.
You need some sleep. That's not like her at all. Wonder if something happened.
Thinking maybe sepsis. Oh well, we can only do our best. Have a good day. In bed now. Least I live so close. Kiss.
Now, the court also heard evidence that around this time the unit had staffing issues and was very busy.
Other messages exchanged between Lucy Letby and her colleagues were read to the court, which showed some of the nurses were unhappy with staffing levels and the numbers of babies they were looking after, which sometimes prompted the unit to close to new admissions. The following exchange between Lucy Letby and a colleague, who can't be identified for legal reasons, begins with the colleague asking Lucy Letby if she'd had a good shift.
Good night.
No, Baby J in 2 screened. Had profound DSATs and just got 32-week twins born at home. 1 with cleft lip and only 5 staff. Kiss.
Oh shit, 5 staff on today, you mean?
Yeah, 5 today. Kiss.
We're closed again then. Jesus.
Yeah, closed trying to get someone in. Cleft baby being tubed, I think. Kiss.
What a bloody nightmare.
It's all a bit tits up.
Sounds it. God, I really don't want to come in now.
Now, Baby J's mother also told jurors that staff at the Countess seemed less capable of managing her daughter's problems. Asked by Ben Myers KC, Lucy Letby's barrister, if staff at the Countess were as geared up to deal with the stoma and issues it presented, Baby J's mother said not as well as Alder Hay.
Yes, and she said that at times her husband had to prompt nurses to give their daughter medication, and when they raised concerns, for example about their daughter's weight gain, there was pushback and they weren't addressed. She also agreed that they didn't seem to have the resources, expertise or time to commit to her daughter's needs. If we raised concerns at the Countess, I didn't feel like they were treated very seriously, she said.
Now, we'll hear more from the defence next week, but Mr Myers has previously told the jury that the Countess of Chester Hospital was well out of its depth with Baby J. Now, one of the prosecution expert witnesses who we've talked a lot about, Liz, is Dr Dowie Evans. And in court, we heard some interesting evidence about him, which led to a pretty tense exchange.
Yes, the jury was told about some criticism of Dr. Evans, which had recently come to light. Mr. Myers explained to the jury that last year Dr. Evans was criticised by a judge in the Court of Appeal, and that was in connection with a report he'd produced for a different case. Mr. Myers said Mr. Justice Jackson had described Dr. Evans' report as worthless, saying he'd expressed biased opinions which were outside his professional competence.
Now, Dr. Evans refuted the criticism and defended his reputation. He said he stood by the report, stressing that it was the only time in his 35 years as an expert witness that he'd been criticised in such a way.
That's right, he claimed he'd not seen the criticism until it was brought to his attention last month, and he insisted that if he'd known about it, he would have told those involved with the Lucy Letby case.
He also insisted that all the evidence he'd given to the trial of Lucy Letby had been accurate. He accused Mr. Myers of attempting to create a diversion, being insulting and cherry-picking of the worst kind.
So that's it for this week. Next week we'll hear more from the doctors and nurses who treated baby J. We'll also hear what the prosecution experts say happened to her. Lucy Letby denies all the charges. And we'll both be back next week. See you then.
Lucy Letby is accused of the murder of
7 babies and the attempted murder of 10 others.
While she was working on the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital.
Letby denies all of the charges over the incidents.
Lucy Letby was the only person working on the night shift. It was alleged in court that their mother was apparently told by Miss Letby, "Trust me, I'm a nurse."
This is a podcast about one of the most anticipated criminal trials for years. It involves the most shocking of allegations, the alleged murders and attempted murders of tiny, premature babies at the hands of a neonatal nurse whose very job it was to look after them.
Lucy Letby is on trial at Manchester Crown Court, accused of killing 7 infants and injuring 10 more at the Countess of Chester Hospital in Cheshire.
In total, there are 22 charges, all of which she denies.
I'm Liz Hull, Northern correspondent for the Mail. I will be in court to report on the case as it develops.
And I'm Caroline Cheetham, a broadcast journalist. Every week on this podcast, we'll examine what's happened and bring you the details behind the headlines.
This is the trial of Lucy Letby.
The case against Lucy Letby is that she murdered or tried to kill 17 babies while she was working as a neonatal nurse at the Countess of Chester Hospital in the northwest of England. She denies the charges.
The babies in this trial are not being named for legal reasons, and the identities of their families are also being protected. They're known only as babies A to Q.
7 of the babies died. 10 survived. Each one of these babies was or is someone's son or daughter, and the mums, dads and families of every baby are present in court, listening to every detail of how their child was allegedly killed or harmed.
We'll be bringing you that detail as the jury is hearing it from the prosecution and defence. We're getting behind the headlines to explain far more than the news reports you'll be reading, watching and listening to. And the importance of a fair trial is paramount, so we won't be getting into anything in this podcast that the jury have not been told, because they are the 12 people who have to decide the outcome of this case.
Today, in this bonus episode, we're focusing again on the 10th baby in this case, who the prosecution say Lucy Letby tried to smother.
Welcome to episode 16, Baby J, Part 2.
So Liz, we are back with this special bonus episode to explain the rest of the evidence relating to baby J. And Liz, I should just explain, I sound like this because I have a good old-fashioned cold.
Yeah, Caroline, you do sound a bit bunged up, but thank you for soldiering on. So we've heard a bit about this premature baby girl earlier in the week, mainly from her mother, who gave evidence in person to the court. Now the jury have heard from the doctors and nurses on duty when the alleged attack supposedly took place.
So we'll be outlining all of this today, but in a nutshell, Liz, the prosecution say that baby J, who was described in court as lively and alert, was smothered by Lucy Letby in an attempt to kill her.
They say at some point her brain was starved of oxygen, causing a seizure. And because none of the experts could find a medical reason for it, they say it must have been a deliberate act.
So let's walk through what we do know, Liz. That's that baby J was actually a twin, but the court heard that her mother had lost one of the babies 17 weeks into her pregnancy.
That's right, baby J's mum had a complication called twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome. This happens when identical twins share a placenta in the womb, and blood is not supplied evenly to each baby, often causing one to receive too much blood and become bigger than the other, who receives too little. Doctors did operate to try and correct the condition, but sadly it didn't work, and one of the twins died.
Baby J survived surgery and she was eventually born 8 weeks early at the end of October 2015. But she was born with a perforated bowel and immediately after birth she went straight to Alderhay Children's Hospital in Liverpool for an operation to repair it.
And she recovered well after the operation, so much so that in the days before the alleged attack, at the end of November, her parents had been getting ready to bring her home.
But at the end of a night shift on the morning of the 27th of November, the prosecution say Lucy Letby tried to murder baby J. We've already heard that a nursery nurse called Nicola Dennison was looking after her in nursery 4. Lucy Letby was actually in nursery 3 with 2 other babies.
That's right, and in court we saw a photograph of the neonatal unit, which showed nursery 4, where baby J was being cared for, at the end of the corridor. We'll share those pictures on our Twitter feed at Lucy Letby Trial.
So Nurse Dennison, who was looking after baby J that night and who by then had worked at the Countess for 30 years, gave evidence to the court.
She said that as far as she was concerned, baby J was really well. She described her as being a nice little baby, lively and alert. In fact, she was at the end of her neonatal journey, she said. Her evidence is voiced by an actor.
Being in nursery 4 usually reflects a relatively well baby. One not complicated, that is getting ready for home, not requiring a nurse at their bedside all the time. We try to replicate what parents would do at home. Low lighting, less noise, no radio, door ajar so the general noise from the corridor doesn't disturb the patient. There would not necessarily be a staff member sitting in that nursery, but they would be in earshot of any alarms.
Nurse Dennison told jurors that because baby J had been considered stable and well, she didn't think she was inside nursery 4 when she suffered 2 separate drops in her oxygen levels, once at 4:40 a.m. and then again at 3 minutes past 5.
Nurse Dennison said it was difficult to recall exactly, but she did remember on at least one occasion going to join Nurse Mary Griffith, who had responded to baby J's monitor alarm, and baby J was given some oxygen to help her breathing.
Following these 2 collapses, a doctor called Dr. George Verghese examined baby J and decided to carry out some tests. He was worried she could have an infection, and the decision was taken to move her back into the high dependency room, nursery 2, so she could be monitored more closely. And Nurse Griffith, who was more qualified to look after more poorly babies, took over her care.
And it's the prosecution case that this first pair of collapses was due to Lucy Letby tampering with baby J's care and somehow interfering with her oxygen levels, possibly by smothering.
Unfortunately, Liz, this wasn't the end of baby J's problems on this shift.
No, Caroline. The jury heard that around 2 hours later she suffered another collapse, which was more serious.
Yes, at 6:56 a.m, her monitor alarm sounded and her oxygen dropped dangerously low and her heart rate also fell.
Dr. John Gibbs, the senior consultant who we've heard from before, was already on the unit at this time. He'd been called in from home to help look after a set of preterm twins who aren't part of this case, but who'd been born at home 8 weeks early and blue lighted by ambulance to the hospital as an emergency. So when baby J collapsed again, he was already on hand to help.
And he told the jury that he remembered Lucy Letby was at baby J's cot side with Nurse Griffith.
He said he quickly realised that baby J was suffering a seizure. Her circulation was poor, and she needed around 20 minutes of oxygen via a mask, but thankfully no chest compressions before she eventually recovered.
But less than half an hour later, she collapsed again, Liz, for the 4th time. She had another seizure. She needed oxygen again for around 8 minutes this time.
Dr. Gibbs said, again, baby J's oxygen and heart rate dropped, and she needed support for her breathing, just as in the first episode. He said, this episode was much shorter. She did display the stiffness of all her limbs and clenches of her hands, and on the second episode her eyes deviated to the left.
And doctors were worried, weren't they, Liz, and they began desperately trying to find out what had caused it.
That's right, the court heard that doctors carried out a series of blood tests and x-rays. They also did a brain scan to try and work out what had happened, but all these came back as normal. Baby J had no infection or bleed on the brain that could explain her sudden deterioration, the jury was told.
Another doctor the court heard from this week was Dr. Stephen Breary. Now, he's a senior doctor who looked after baby J following her collapses on the day shift of November the 27th.
He told jurors that baby J's recovery was remarkable. His words have been voiced by an actor.
She normalised very quickly over the course of the day, and all the investigations we had undertaken couldn't identify why she had the desaturations or explain why she had the seizures. I do know hypoxia, or lack of oxygen in the blood, causes seizures, so that would be possibly the most likely cause. There remains a question why baby J was hypoxic when, for 2 or 3 weeks beforehand, she had been breathing normally in air and there was no suggestion of infection. She remained well for weeks afterwards.
So it's the prosecution case, Liz, that the only explanation is that Lucy Letby was to blame. Somehow she interrupted baby J's breathing again, most likely by smothering her, causing her brain to be starved of oxygen, causing a seizure.
That's right, Caroline. Dr. Dowie Evans, the prosecution's main expert witness, told jurors that the second pair of collapses, just before and after 7 a.m, were more serious than the first 2 hours earlier. He said baby J required more in the way of resuscitation, and they coincided with what the doctors treating her described as a seizure or a fit.
This, Dr. Evans said, was because something was going wrong with her brain. My opinion was that her brain was deprived of oxygen for a sufficient level of time to cause hypoxia or a loss of oxygen to the brain causing fits, he said.
Dr. Evans told the jurors he could find no natural process that might have caused this.
Ben Myers, KC, Lucy Letby's barrister, asked Dr. Evans if he could rule out an infection as the cause of baby J's collapse.
He told the court he couldn't rule it out for sure.
But the other prosecution expert, Dr. Sandy Bowen, was more adamant. Infection was not to blame.
She told the court, baby J was a well baby. She was ready to go home. Babies who are ready to go home do not have major desaturations, which lead to prolonged resuscitation.
She said the collapses were completely unexpected and required oxygen via a face mask for a long time before baby J came round and was well again.
Dr. Bowen said, I thought that seemed extremely unusual. The speed of the collapse, the longevity of the resuscitations, and the fact that she seemed to recover quite quickly. That is not the way that infection normally plays out.
And Dr. Bowen noted that baby J was clinically well and back to her normal self before she'd even received any antibiotics.
Again, Mr. Myers questioned her on whether infection could be responsible, but she was insistent. There was no obvious cause for her collapses, Dr. Bowen said. I exclude infection.
So baby J recovered, and she spent another 6 weeks in hospital after the alleged attack, and she eventually went home in January 2016.
She was later seen by Dr. Gibbs in his clinic 3 times before eventually being discharged, aged 19 months. By then, she was a well little girl, he said.
Baby J is now aged 7 and has not needed to return to hospital.
Lucy Letby denies harming her. So that's it for this bonus episode.
Now the next baby in this case, Liz, is baby Kay, who the prosecution say Lucy Letby attempted to murder in February 2016, so exactly 7 years ago. But the prosecution are not outlining her case yet. The jury were told only that this was for good reason.
Yes, the prosecution will return to baby Kay later on in the trial, but next week they'll be jumping out of sequence chronologically and moving on to babies L and M. They're twin boys who Lucy Letby is accused of trying to kill, either by poisoning with insulin or injecting with air in April 2016.
The boys survived, and we'll bring you all the detail of what the prosecution say happened to them next week.
And we'll also hear on Monday about how Lucy Letby broke down in court in tears when a doctor that she used to work with started giving evidence.
See you then.